Blackthorn Hollow was the kind of village that outsiders rarely visited, and even more rarely left. Nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, it was cut off from the modern world, untouched by time. The villagers still lived by the old ways, bound to traditions older than memory, and none was more sacred than the offering. Lena Whitmore, a journalist from the city, had always been drawn to strange folklore. When she came across a mention of Blackthorn Hollow in an old book on rural superstitions, she was intrigued. The book spoke of the village's strange rituals, of disappearances, and most chillingly, of the one beneath the soil, a spirit said to demand an annual sacrifice under the light of the harvest moon. She had to see it for herself. Lena arrived in Blackthorn Hollow on the morning of the festival. The villagers, though polite, seemed wary of her presence. They whispered behind her back, their eyes darting toward the sky, as if tracking the slow ascent of the moon. At the village inn, an old woman named Agnes, the owner, placed a steaming bowl of stew in front of Lena and sat across from her. "You should leave before nightfall," Agnes said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The offering is not for outsiders." Lena smiled, amused. "I just want to watch. I won't interfere." Agnes shook her head. "No one watches, child. You are either part of it or you are not here at all." The words sent a chill down Lena's spine. The ritual begins. As night fell, she made her way toward the clearing where the offering would take place. The full moon hung large and golden in the sky, bathing the land in an eerie glow. The villagers had gathered, dressed in old-fashioned, hand-woven cloaks. At the center of the clearing stood a massive wooden effigy, a towering figure adorned with dried flowers, bones, and tattered cloth. The village elder, a tall man with deep-set eyes and a voice like crackling firewood, stepped forward. He held a rusted dagger, the blade reflecting the moonlight. The villagers swayed in unison, chanting in a language Lena did not recognize. Then she noticed something strange. The air around her seemed thicker. The ground beneath her feet trembled slightly. Shadows at the edge of the clearing stretched unnaturally, twisting and curling like living tendrils. And then she saw them. Dark figures stood between the trees, watching. They were not villagers. Their eyes glowed faintly, their limbs unnaturally long, their faces hollowed and wrong. A primal fear gripped Lena. She turned to leave, but strong hands seized her arms. The elder's voice was calm but firm. "You shouldn't have stayed." Panic surged through her. "Let me go!" she screamed, struggling, but the villagers held her fast. "The one beneath the soil has chosen." Lena was dragged toward the effigy. The ground beneath it had cracked open, revealing an abyss that exhaled a sickly, rotting stench. From the depths came a wet, slithering sound, as if something massive was shifting in the dark. A voice deep and ancient whispered her name. Lena's breath hitched. No one should know her name. The elder raised the dagger. "You will nourish the soil, and the soil will feed us." The villagers cheered, their faces no longer entirely human, their mouths stretched too wide, their eyes too black. Lena screamed. The next day, the sun rose over Blackthorn Hollow, golden and warm. The villagers went about their business as if nothing had happened. Crops swayed in the wind, unnaturally tall, their roots thick and pulsing. The villagers whispered thanks to the one beneath the soil. And in the center of the clearing, where the offering had taken place, a new flower bloomed, its petals the color of blood, its roots stretching deep into the earth, where something still whispered her name. Bracken Hollow was the kind of town where tradition was law and change was unwelcome. Tucked between rolling fields of golden wheat, the village thrived on its harvest, and the people owed their bounty to something older than memory. Visitors found the place unsettling. The handmade charms of twisted wheat hanging above every door, the wooden figures standing guard at every fence post, and the way the townsfolk would hush their voices at sundown. Lena had heard the stories growing up, told in whispers by her grandmother. She never believed them. But she should have, because in Bracken Hollow, the fields weren't just for growing. They were for keeping something in. And the moment she broke the oldest rule, It came looking for her. Bracken Hollow was a village of strict traditions, and none were stricter than the first harvest rite. Each year, the elders, wrinkled hands trembling but precise, would cut the first sheaf of wheat in a solemn ritual. It was an offering, a bargain with the Hollow Man, the unseen watcher of the fields. Lena, visiting from the city, had never believed in small-town folklore. When she arrived at her grandmother's cottage, she was amused by the charms of twisted wheat tied above every doorway, the rows of carved wooden figures watching from porches. But when she picked the first sheaf for a table decoration, her grandmother turned pale. "Put it back, now!" Lena laughed. "It's just wheat, Nana." Her grandmother grabbed her wrist. "Number, it's his. You don't take from the Hollow Man before the elders do. We give, and he lets us take the rest." That night, Lena lay in bed, restless. The house was too silent. No cicadas, no rustling wind. Then just beyond the window, she heard it. A voice, soft, like the whisper of leaves. "One must stay, so the rest may reap." She sat up. The air felt thick, as though something unseen had stepped into the house, watching from the dark corners. Shadows stretched unnaturally in the moonlight. Then she heard it again, a rustling outside, like something large moving through the wheat. She peeked through the curtains. In the field, a figure stood among the stalks. Tall, thin, wrong. Its limbs were stretched like dried vines, its fingers too long, curling like grasping roots. Its face was a hollow pit, carved deep into something that was not quite wood, not quite flesh. The Hollow Man. It tilted its head as if listening. Then it stepped forward. Lena stumbled back, heart hammering. The whispers grew louder, coming from everywhere, from inside the walls, the floor, the rafters. The entire house breathed with them. The front door clicked open on its own. Her grandmother's voice came as a desperate whisper from her room. "Get in the cellar, now!" Lena ran, but her feet felt sluggish, as if the house itself tried to hold her in place. She reached the cellar door and yanked it open just as a long, brittle hand grasped the doorway. The Hollow Man crouched in the threshold, head tilting, its fingers twitching. Its presence smelled of dry leaves and rot, of something long buried and hungry. Her grandmother shoved her inside and slammed the door, bolting it. For hours, Lena listened to the house creak and groan. Heavy footsteps scraped across the floor above. The thing was inside. It was looking, searching. Then silence. Dawn came with the sound of birds chirping again. When Lena finally crept out of the cellar, her grandmother stood in the open doorway, clutching something in her trembling hands. A single, hollow husk of wheat, shaped like a human figure. Her grandmother exhaled shakily. "It took your place." Lena turned to the field, the golden wheat swaying gently in the morning breeze. There, standing exactly where the Hollow Man had been, was a new scarecrow. And though its head was just a bundle of bound stalks, she swore she could still see a grin.